The morning I discovered my heated walkway system had been completely dismantled. I stood in my driveway, wearing nothing but pajamas and slippers while snow fell around me like tiny accusations. Someone had literally torn up the entire installation overnight, leaving jagged holes in my concrete and a mess of severed wires protruding from the ground like mechanical guts. 3 years of planning, $20,000 of investment, and countless hours of installation work, all destroyed in what must have been a coordinated effort involving heavy equipment. My name is Daniel Young, and I had moved to Meadowbrook Springs, Colorado 6 months earlier with dreams of escaping the chaos of Denver for something quieter. The subdivision was new, pristine, and marketed as a premium community where everything was maintained to perfection. What they failed to mention in the glossy brochures was that the Homeowners Association was run by a woman named Patricia Hendricks, who treated her position as HOA president with the gravitas of a military dictatorship. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, partly from cold and partly from rage, and called the non-emergency police line. Officer Martinez arrived 40 minutes later, a stocky man in his 40s who looked like he had seen this particular brand of neighborhood drama too many times. "When did you last see the system intact?" he asked, photographing the damage with a department-issued camera. "Yesterday evening around 7. I walked my dog and everything was fine. The heating elements were working perfectly. We are supposed to get 8 inches tonight, so I had it running to keep ahead of the accumulation." Officer Martinez crouched near one of the excavated sections, examining the cuts in the wiring. This was not amateur work. Someone used professional equipment, probably a concrete saw excavator. "You hear anything last night?" "Nothing. I took an Ambien around 10 because I had a headache. I sleep like the dead when I take those." He stood up, brushing snow from his knees. "Value of the damage, $20,000 for the initial installation. Maybe another 5 to repair all this destruction, assuming the control system was not damaged. That's housed in my garage." We walked to the garage together. The control panel hung open, wires yanked free, the circuit board cracked down the middle as if someone had taken a hammer to it. My hands clenched into fists. "Make that another 10,000, I said quietly. That control system was custom programmed. Officer Martinez wrote everything down methodically. Any idea who might have done this? The HOA has been up my behind since I installed it. Patricia Hendricks, the president, sent me 3 letters claiming it was not approved, but I checked the covenants before installation. There is nothing prohibiting heated walkways, and my installation was entirely on my property, not community space." "You got those letters?" "Every single one." I also have the email exchange where I cited the specific covenant language allowing it. Officer Martinez nodded slowly. "Okay, this is enough for a report. Whether criminal charges stick depends on proving who did it. You got security cameras?" "I do now," I said grimly. "Getting them installed this afternoon." After Officer Martinez left, I spent the next 3 hours documenting every inch of damage with my own photographs and measurements. The snow kept falling, already accumulating in the torn-up sections of my walkway. My heated system would have kept everything clear and safe. Now I had a liability minefield. My phone rang around noon. "Unknown number, Mr. Young." A woman's voice, clipped and officious, speaking. "This is Patricia Hendricks from the Meadowbrook Springs HOA. I am calling regarding the unauthorized modifications to your property that violated several community covenants." The audacity actually took my breath away for a moment. "You mean the heated walkway system that someone destroyed last night? I just filed a police report." What you call a heated walkway system was an unapproved modification that created liability issues for the entire community. The board voted last night to have it removed. You will be receiving a bill for the removal service, as well as a fine for the initial unauthorized installation. My vision actually blurred at the edges. Patricia, that system was entirely on my property. I reviewed the covenants extensively before installation. Clearly, you missed Section 7, Paragraph 3, which requires board approval for any exterior modifications that alter the visual appearance of the property, or that consume additional utilities in a manner that might impact community resources. My electric bill is my own business. And the visual appearance, it was flush with the existing walkway. You could not even tell it was there unless the snow was melting. The board disagrees with your assessment. The removal has been completed, and you will receive the invoice within 3 business days. Have a nice day, Mr. Young. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding the phone, trying to process what had just happened. An HOA had just admitted to destroying $20,000 of my property based on a questionable interpretation of a covenant that probably did not even apply. And they expected me to pay for the destruction. I immediately called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres, who I had worked with on real estate transactions before. "Daniel," she said warmly when she picked up, "how's the new house, currently being tyrannized by the HOA?" "You got time to hear a story?" I laid out everything. The installation, Patricia's letters, the overnight destruction, her phone call. Rebecca listened without interrupting. "Send me everything," she said when I finished. Photos, police report, all correspondence with the HOA, the original covenants you reviewed, everything. "This is going to be a fight, Daniel. HOAs have a lot of legal protection in Colorado, but what you are describing sounds like they crossed several lines. What are we talking timeline-wise?" "Months, possibly over a year if it goes to litigation, and that's going to cost you. Probably $15,000 minimum in legal fees, potentially more if they fight hard." I looked out at my destroyed walkway, snow piling up in the excavated holes. "Do it. I am not letting them get away with this." The next few days were a blur of documentation and research. The security cameras went up, 8 of them covering every angle of my property. I sent Rebecca everything she requested. The HOA's invoice arrived via certified mail on day 3. $12,000 for emergency removal of unauthorized property modifications, plus a $5,000 fine. $17,000 they expected me to pay for destroying my own property. Rebecca filed an injunction within hours of receiving the invoice, blocking any attempt by the HOA to place a lien on my property for the charges. We also filed a counterclaim for the damage, seeking full restitution plus punitive damages. But legal proceedings moved slowly, and winter did not. The snow kept falling and my walkway remained a torn-up mess. I patched it temporarily with cold patch asphalt, but it was ugly and definitely not up to HOA standards. I waited for the complaint letter. It arrived within a week. Patricia, in her infinite irony, cited me for having an unsightly walkway that violated community standards. The fine was $200 per week until I brought it into compliance. I called Rebecca immediately. She actually laughed when I read her the letter. "They just handed us an even stronger case. Document everything but don't pay any of these fines. They are digging their own grave." The HOA's next move came 2 weeks later. I received a notice that I was required to attend a board meeting to discuss my pattern of covenant violations and non-compliance with board directives. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Thursday at the community clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early with a leather folder containing printed copies of every piece of documentation I had assembled. The clubhouse was one of those modern prefab buildings trying to look upscale with fake stone facades and LED lighting. Inside, a conference room had been set up with a long table at the front where 5 board members sat like a judicial panel. Patricia Hendricks occupied the center seat, a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair cut in a severe bob and glasses that seemed designed to make her look more authoritative. To her left sat Martin Cruz, the vice president, a thin man with a nervous energy who kept clicking a pen. To her right was Susan Caldwell, the secretary, an older woman who looked like she had stepped out of a country club catalog. About 15 other homeowners sat in the audience chairs, presumably there for their own inquisitions or just to watch the drama. Patricia banged a gavel unnecessarily hard. This meeting of the Meadowbrook Springs HOA board is now in session. First item on the agenda, the matter of Daniel Young of 847 Wintergreen Drive. I remained seated in the audience section. "Mr. Young, please come to the front." I walked forward slowly, holding my folder. There was no chair for me to sit in, so I stood. "Mr. Young," Patricia began, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who has rehearsed this moment, "you have repeatedly violated community covenants despite multiple warnings from this board. You installed an unauthorized heating system that required the board to take emergency action. You have refused to pay the associated costs, and you have failed to properly repair your walkway, creating an ongoing eyesore and safety hazard. What do you have to say for yourself?" I opened my folder. I have several things to say. First, the heated walkway system was installed in full compliance with all stated covenants. I have the documentation here showing exactly which sections I reviewed and how my installation met all requirements. The board determines compliance, not individual homeowners, Patricia interrupted. Second, I continued, the board's destruction of my property constitutes vandalism and possibly criminal trespassing. I have filed a police report and am pursuing legal action. Third, the condition of my walkway is a direct result of the board's illegal actions. I have been cited for an unsightly appearance that the board itself created. That's called manufactured non-compliance, and it is going to look really bad in court. Martin Cruz's pen clicking intensified. Susan Caldwell whispered something to Patricia. Patricia's face had flushed red. "Mr. Young, this board has the authority under Colorado law to enforce covenant compliance. Your opinion on the legality of our actions is irrelevant. Then I guess we will let a judge decide." "Is there anything else? The board is voting tonight on whether to begin foreclosure proceedings on your property due to non-payment of fines and invoices." My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. "You already received notice of the injunction preventing any liens on my property. If you proceed with foreclosure, you will be in violation of a court order." Patricia smiled thinly. "We will see what our attorneys say. You are dismissed." I walked out of that meeting shaking with adrenaline. As I reached my car, an older man approached me from the parking lot. "That was well done in there," he said, extending his hand. "George Martinez. I live on Silverwood Lane." "Daniel Young," I said, shaking his hand. "Any relation to Officer Martinez, my son, actually. He told me about your situation." Patricia has been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom for 3 years now. Most people just comply because fighting is expensive and exhausting. "Well, I am too angry to be tired yet," George chuckled. "Good. Listen, you should know that Patricia has done this before. Not the destruction thing specifically, but she has forced out 4 families that she decided were not up to her standards. She finds violations, piles on fines, makes life miserable until people sell and leave. How is she getting away with it? Most of the homeowners do not pay attention. They vote her back in every year because she is the only one who runs, and she has friends on the board who do whatever she says. Martin and Susan are basically her puppets. What about the other two board members? They did not say anything tonight. Ken Brewster and Linda Walsh. They are newer to the board, and I think they are uncomfortable with how Patricia operates, but they have not pushed back yet. Might be worth talking to them. I filed that information away. Thanks for the heads up, George. One more thing, he said, lowering his voice. Patricia's husband owns a concrete and excavation company, Mountain Peak Contractors. Might want to look into whether they were the ones who tore up your walkway. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept churning through possibilities and implications. If Patricia had used her husband's company to destroy my property, that added a whole new dimension to the case. It might even elevate it from a civil matter to criminal fraud. In the morning, I called Officer Martinez and relayed what George had told me. I can request phone records and financial documents if we can establish probable cause, he said. But that's a higher bar. We would need something connecting Mountain Peak to the destruction. What if I can get that evidence? Legally, Daniel. I know you are angry, but do not do anything stupid. Legally, I promised. I spent the weekend researching. Mountain Peak Contractors had been in business for 12 years, owned and operated by Hendricks, Patricia's husband. They specialized in concrete work, excavation, and infrastructure installation. They had contracts with several HOAs in the area for maintenance work, including Meadowbrook Springs. Digging deeper into public records, I found that Mountain Peak had been paid over $60,000 by the Meadowbrook Springs HOA in the past year alone for various projects. Snow removal, concrete repairs, drainage work, all approved by the board, naturally. Rebecca was very interested when I called her with this information. This could establish a pattern of self-dealing, she said. If Patricia is using her position to funnel HOA money to her husband's company, that is a breach of fiduciary duty. And if they use that company to destroy your property and then tried to bill you for it, that is fraud. How do we prove it? We subpoena their records. Financial documents, work orders, invoices. It is all going to come out in discovery. But Daniel, this also means this case is going to get uglier before it gets better. They are going to fight hard. Good. I am ready to fight. The next board action came faster than I expected. 3 days after the contentious meeting, I received a formal notice that the HOA was initiating a lawsuit against me for $17,000 in unpaid fines and invoices, plus attorney fees. They were also seeking a court order to force me to remove all security cameras pointed toward common areas, claiming it violated privacy rights of other residents. Rebecca countered immediately with an amended complaint that included allegations of self-dealing, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional destruction of property. We also filed for expedited discovery, requesting all financial records related to Mountain Peak Contractors. Then came the waiting game. Legal proceedings ground forward at a glacial pace. Motions were filed and countered. Court dates were set and rescheduled. Winter deepened and my walkway remained a patched mess. But I was not just sitting around. The security cameras I had installed captured something interesting in mid-January. Patricia drove by my house at least 3 times a day, often slowing down to stare at my property. Sometimes she would stop and take photographs. She was clearly documenting every perceived violation. Fine. 2 could play that game. I started my own documentation routine. Every time I saw Patricia or any board member inspecting properties, I photographed it. I noticed they seemed to focus disproportionately on houses owned by younger families or people who had shown any pushback against board decisions. Meanwhile, obvious violations on properties owned by their friends went unmentioned. Like the house 3 doors down with a boat parked in the driveway for 6 weeks straight, directly violating the covenant against recreational vehicles. Or the property on Silverwood Lane with a collapsing fence that had been in disrepair for months. I compiled everything into a detailed spreadsheet: violation, property address, date observed, whether it was cited by the HOA. The pattern of selective enforcement was damning. In February, we finally got our first break. The court granted our discovery motion, ordering the HOA to produce all financial records for the past 3 years, including contracts with Mountain Peak contractors. They also had to produce all correspondence related to my property. Rebecca called me the day after the documents arrived at her office. "Daniel, you need to come see this, today." I drove to her office in downtown Denver immediately, navigating through traffic with a growing sense of anticipation. Rebecca had papers spread across her entire conference table. She looked energized in a way I had not seen before. "They are screwed," she said without preamble. "Mountain Peak Contractors has been paid $240,000 by the HOA over the past 3 years. That is roughly 40% of the entire HOA budget. For a community of 85 homes, that is wildly excessive." She pulled out a specific invoice. "And here is the smoking gun. December 15th, 2 days before your system was destroyed. The HOA paid Mountain Peak $12,000 for emergency concrete and infrastructure removal work at 847 Wintergreen Drive. Your address." My hands trembled as I took the invoice. They documented their own crime. It gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. Look at the timing of the board vote. According to the meeting minutes, the board voted to remove your system on December 14th. But look at this email. She showed me a printed exchange between Patricia and her husband Ronald. It was dated December 10th. "Patricia, can your crew handle a rush job next week? Need that heated system removed ASAP before more snow comes." "Ronald, what's the situation?" "Patricia, homeowner who doesn't respect authority. Installed without approval. Need it gone." "Ronald, might be tricky legally." "Are you sure the board will back this?" "Patricia, I am the board. I will get Martin and Susan to vote however I need. Ken and Linda won't fight it. Can you do it or not?" "Ronald, for $12K, absolutely." "They planned the whole thing in advance," I said slowly. "The board vote was just theater." "Exactly. And that email establishes premeditation. This is not just a civil matter anymore, Daniel. This is fraud, possibly criminal conspiracy." We spent the next 2 hours going through the documents. The picture that emerged was of an HOA board completely dominated by Patricia, funneling community money to her husband's company while using her authority to punish anyone who challenged her. It was corrupt on a level that honestly shocked me. "What's our next move?" I asked. "I am going to forward all of this to the district attorney's office. The criminal fraud charges are substantial. Separately, we are going to file for summary judgment on your case. With this evidence, there is no way they can fight it. And the HOA, the community. You might want to consider calling an emergency homeowners meeting. Under the bylaws, 15% of homeowners can petition for a special election to recall the board. That would be 13 homeowners. Think you can find 12 allies?" I thought of George Martinez and the other families I had seen Patricia target. "Yeah, I can find them." That evening, I started knocking on doors. My first stop was George's house, a well-maintained ranch with solar panels on the roof. He invited me in immediately. I heard the court ordered document production. Find anything good? I told him everything. His expression darkened as I went through the details. I knew she was corrupt, but this is beyond what I imagined, he said when I finished. What do you need from me? Help gathering signatures. We need 13 homeowners to force a recall election. I am in. And I know at least 6 others who will sign immediately. There's a couple on Pinewood Court who Patricia fined $15,000 for painting their house the wrong shade of beige. They would sign in blood if you asked. Over the next week, I collected signatures. Every person I talked to had a story about Patricia and the board. The family who got fined for having their trash cans visible from the street for 15 minutes past the pickup window. The single mother who was cited for having toys in her yard because they created visual clutter. The retired couple who faced foreclosure threats over a mailbox that was 3 inches too tall, according to Patricia's interpretation of the standards. By Friday, I had 17 signatures. George helped me draft the formal petition, and we submitted it to the board according to the proper procedures. Patricia's response came via her lawyer. A formal letter claiming the petition was invalid due to procedural irregularities and would not be honored. Rebecca's counter-response included a copy of the bylaws highlighted in yellow showing exactly why the petition was valid, along with a warning that blocking a legitimate recall election would constitute another breach of fiduciary duty. The recall election was scheduled for March 15th. Patricia tried everything to prevent it. She claimed the clubhouse was unavailable that day. We moved the meeting to the community park. She sent out a letter to all homeowners claiming the recall was being driven by a malcontent seeking to avoid accountability for his violations. George and I countered with our own letter laying out the evidence of corruption. The night before the election, someone vandalized my security cameras. Spray paint covered 3 of the lenses. I had the footage, though. It showed a teenager I did not recognize approaching my property at 2 a.m. I filed another police report. Officer Martinez took the report and looked tired. Patricia's nephew, he said, showing me a photo. Recognize him. That is the kid who spray painted my cameras. We will bring him in for questioning, but Daniel, you need to understand something. Patricia has connections in this town. Her family has been here for generations. The chief of police went to high school with her brother. This is not going to be straightforward. Are you telling me she is going to get away with this? I am telling you to be prepared for a fight that goes beyond the HOA. The recall election took place on a cold, clear evening. 72 of the 85 homeowners showed up, an unprecedented turnout according to George. Patricia sat at the front of the gathering with Martin and Susan flanking her like guards. Ken and Linda sat separately, looking uncomfortable. The voting was simple. Recall the current board, yes or no. George had organized homeowners to speak about their experiences before the vote. One by one, people stood up and told their stories. A young father talked about being fined $5,000 because his grass was a 1/4 inch too tall during a week when his wife was hospitalized. An elderly woman described how Patricia had threatened foreclosure because she had installed a wheelchair ramp without approval, claiming it violated architectural standards. The stories went on for over an hour. Patricia tried to interrupt multiple times, but the crowd shouted her down. I saw real fear in her eyes for the first time. She was losing control. When the vote was finally counted, it was overwhelming. 68 homeowners voted yes to recall the board. Only 4 voted no. Patricia stood up, her face flushed. This election is invalid. The board does not recognize the results. George stood. Under the bylaws, you don't have a choice, Patricia. The vote was legitimate and the margin is clear. You are no longer the president of this HOA. You and your board are removed effective immediately. My lawyer will be filing an injunction first thing tomorrow, Patricia said coldly. Your lawyer can try, Rebecca said from the back of the room. I had not even realized she had shown up. But I should inform you that the district attorney's office will be filing criminal charges against you and your husband tomorrow morning. Fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit property destruction. The evidence is quite substantial. The color drained from Patricia's face. Around the room, people started murmuring. This was bigger than anyone had realized. Patricia grabbed her purse and walked out of the meeting without another word. Martin and Susan hurried after her. Ken and Linda stayed, both looking shell-shocked. The homeowners voted to establish an interim board that night. George was elected president. Linda and Ken were asked to stay on for continuity. 2 other longtime residents were voted in to fill the remaining spots, and then we got to the practical matters. The previous board's actions regarding 847 Wintergreen Drive were improper and likely criminal, George said formally. I move that the HOA take the following actions. 1. Issue a formal apology to Daniel Young. 2. Reimburse him the full cost of the destroyed property and repairs. 3. Terminate any and all fines or invoices issued regarding this matter. 4. Cooperate fully with law enforcement in the criminal investigation. All in favor. The vote was unanimous among the interim board members. I stood there feeling a weight lift that I had been carrying for months. It was not over yet. There would still be legal proceedings and potential criminal trials. But the immediate battle was won. The next morning, Detective Sarah Walsh from the district attorney's office showed up at my house with Officer Martinez. Mr. Young, she said, shaking my hand. I need to go through your documentation in detail. We are building a case that goes beyond just your situation. Based on the financial records, it appears Patricia and Ronald Hendricks have been systematically defrauding the HOA for years. I spent 4 hours walking her through everything. Every document, every photograph, every invoice. She took copies of all my records and seemed particularly interested in the email exchange between Patricia and Ronald planning the destruction of my heated system. This establishes intent and premeditation, she said. Combined with the financial evidence, we are looking at serious charges. Probably looking at multiple felonies. What kind of timeline are we talking about? Arraignment will probably be next week. After that, it depends on whether they fight or try to plea. Given the evidence, I would expect a plea deal, but you never know. Patricia and Ronald Hendricks were arrested on March 20th. The local news covered it. A brief segment about HOA corruption that felt almost anticlimactic given how much the situation had dominated my life. But my focus shifted to restoration. With the HOA's cooperation, I filed an insurance claim for the destroyed property. My homeowner's insurance agreed to cover the costs, minus my deductible, and would be pursuing their own action against the Hendrickses for reimbursement. I hired a different contractor to reinstall the heated walkway system. This time, I made sure to get formal written approval from the new HOA board, even though the system met all covenant requirements. George signed off on it personally with an apology letter attached. The installation took 3 weeks. The contractor, a guy named Mike who ran a small family business, did exceptional work. He upgraded some of the components, installed a better control system, and even reinforced the concrete to make sure there would not be any long-term structural issues from the previous destruction. Heard about what happened to you, Mike said as his crew finished up. Patricia cost me a lot of business over the years. Her husband would undercut bids and then do shoddy work because he knew the HOA board would not hold him accountable. Good to see someone finally stood up to them. The system came online on April 2nd, just as a late spring snow began to fall. I stood on my front porch watching the snow hit my walkway and immediately begin to melt. The heated elements worked perfectly, keeping the concrete clear and dry. My neighbor across the street, a woman named Karen Fletcher who had been one of Patricia's staunch supporters, stood in her driveway glaring at my pristine walkway while she chipped ice from her own. The irony of her name was not lost on me, but the real satisfaction came a week later. The HOA, under new management, had a problem. The contract with Mountain Peak Contractors included snow removal for all common areas, including the sidewalks along the streets. But with the criminal charges pending, Ronald had suspended all services. The community had gone weeks without proper snow removal on common property. The new board held an emergency meeting to discuss alternatives. I attended, not as a defendant this time, but as a regular homeowner. "We are getting bids from other contractors," George explained. "But the earliest anyone can start is next month. In the meantime, we have liability issues with the sidewalks." I raised my hand. "I have a proposal." George nodded at me. "Go ahead, Daniel. My heated walkway system is already installed and operational. I had it designed with excess capacity in case I wanted to expand it to other areas of my property. I could extend the system to cover the public sidewalk in front of my house and the adjacent properties, probably covering about 300 feet of the main road. Would not solve the whole community's problem, but it would address the highest traffic area." "What would that cost the HOA?" Linda asked. "Parts and installation, maybe $3,000. But I am not proposing the HOA pay for it. I will cover the costs myself. Consider it a contribution to community safety." George looked surprised. "That is generous, Daniel, but why would you do that after everything that happened?" "Because my issue was never with the community. It was with Patricia and her corrupt board. You all voted to make things right. This is my way of showing I am not holding grudges. The board voted to accept my proposal, with the condition that the HOA would reimburse me for half the costs. I agreed. The installation took a week. I worked with Mike's crew to extend the heating elements along the public sidewalk in front of my property and the two adjacent houses. The system tied into my existing control panel, and I set it to automatically activate whenever the temperature dropped below 35 degrees with precipitation. The effect was immediate and obvious. While the rest of the community's sidewalks remained icy and hazardous, the section in front of my property and the surrounding area was clear and dry. Parents walking their kids to the bus stop started using my section of sidewalk specifically because it was safe. Karen Fletcher, my across-the-street neighbor, was not pleased. She complained at the next board meeting that it was unfair that some residents had clear sidewalks while others did not. George handled it beautifully. Daniel installed and is maintaining that system at his own expense as a contribution to community safety. If you would like to install a similar system in front of your property, the board would be happy to approve it. Karen sputtered something about it being the HOA's responsibility, but she did not have much ground to stand on. The criminal case against Patricia and Ronald moved forward. In late April, they accepted a plea deal. Patricia pleaded guilty to fraud and embezzlement. Ronald pleaded guilty to conspiracy and destruction of property. Patricia was sentenced to 18 months in prison plus 5 years probation and full restitution to the HOA and to me personally. Ronald got 12 months in prison and similar restitution requirements. The restitution amount was substantial. in addition to the $25,000 they owed me for the destroyed heated system. They had to repay the HOA nearly $150,000 that had been funneled to Mountain Peak contractors through inflated invoices and unnecessary work. My lawyer, Rebecca, negotiated the final settlement with their attorney. I received a check for $25,000 in early May, covering all my damages plus the legal fees I had incurred. But more satisfying than the money was the change in the community. The new HOA board operated transparently, with open meetings and reasonable enforcement of covenants. They established clear guidelines for what required approval and what did not. They solicited bids from multiple contractors for all work. They even created a homeowner advisory committee to review proposed rule changes before the board voted on them. George proved to be an excellent president. He was firm but fair, focusing on actual community maintenance and safety rather than petty enforcement of aesthetic rules. The community started to feel like an actual community. People organized neighborhood barbecues. Kids played in the streets without parents worrying about getting fined if a bike was left on a lawn. There was a sense of relief, like everyone had been holding their breath for years and finally could exhale. My heated walkway became something of a point of pride. When prospective buyers toured the neighborhood, real estate agents would point out the heated sidewalk section as an example of the kind of innovative improvements that were now welcomed rather than punished. I even had 3 other homeowners approach me about installing similar systems on their properties. I connected them with Mike's company, and by July, there were 4 houses in the community with heated walkways. The new board approved all of them without incident. In August, I was working in my front yard when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out looking nervous. "Are you Daniel Young?" she asked. "That's me. I'm Jennifer Walsh. I just bought the house on Pinewood Court. I heard about what happened with the previous HOA board, and I wanted to thank you. My husband and I almost did not buy here because of the horror stories we heard about the HOA. But then we learned about the recall and the changes, and we decided to take a chance. This neighborhood seems really special now." "Welcome to Meadowbrook Springs," I said, shaking her hand. "The real version, not Patricia's version." She laughed. "I saw your heated walkway. That is incredible. Do you think something like that would work on a driveway?" "Absolutely. Let me give you the contractor's information." As she drove away, I looked at my house, my heated walkway, my front yard that I could landscape however I wanted without fear of arbitrary fines. It had been a brutal fight. 9 months of stress, legal fees, documentation, and confrontation. But it had been worth it. The following winter was mild by Colorado standards, but we still got our share of snow. Every time it fell, I felt a deep satisfaction watching my heated system do its job. The walkway stayed clear. The public sidewalk in front of my house stayed safe. Parents waved thanks as they walked their kids past. And every time I saw someone slipping on the icy sidewalks in other parts of the community where the heating did not reach, I felt a small, petty satisfaction remembering Patricia's attempt to punish me for improving my property. George and I became good friends. We had lunch every couple of weeks, talking about community issues and his plans for the HOA. He had big ideas about installing community solar panels and upgrading the clubhouse. "You know what I learned from this whole situation?" he said one afternoon over burgers. "What's that?" HOAs aren't inherently bad. They can serve a real purpose maintaining community standards and property values, but they need oversight and accountability. The moment someone like Patricia gets unchecked power, it all goes wrong fast. Think we've got enough safeguards in place now? I think so. The new bylaws require financial transparency. All board meetings are recorded and posted online. We have term limits now so no one can entrench themselves. And we have an engaged homeowner base that will not tolerate another Patricia. He was right. The April incident had awakened something in the community. Meeting attendance was high. People actually read the financial reports. When the board proposed a small assessment increase to build up the reserve fund, homeowners scrutinized the budget line by line before approving it. It was what an HOA should be. A tool for collective property maintenance and community building, not a weapon for petty tyrants. In December, almost exactly 1 year after my heated system had been destroyed, the community held a holiday party at the clubhouse. It was well attended, with families bringing food and kids running around playing games. Patricia's name came up exactly once, when someone new to the community asked what had happened to the previous board. George gave a diplomatic summary that focused on the reforms that had been implemented rather than dwelling on the corruption. As I drove home that night, past houses decorated with holiday lights and the public sidewalk sections that were heated and clear, I realized something important. I had moved to Meadowbrook Springs looking for peace and quiet, an escape from the chaos of the city. Instead, I had found myself in the middle of a conflict that consumed months of my life and cost me tens of thousands of dollars. But the community that emerged from that conflict was stronger, more connected, and genuinely supportive. The fight had been worth it, not just for me, but for everyone who lived here. My heated walkway was more than just a convenient system that kept my property safe in winter. It had become a symbol of what happens when people stand up to petty tyranny and demand accountability. It represented the idea that following the rules should be about genuine community benefit, not about enforcing arbitrary power. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, watching snow begin to fall. The flakes hit my walkway and melted instantly, exactly as designed. Inside my garage, the control system hummed quietly, doing its job without complaint or drama. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is simply building something good, standing up for what is right, and refusing to be intimidated by people who mistake authority for power. Patricia served her time and moved out of state after her release. I heard she and Ronald divorced. Mountain Peak Contractors went bankrupt. The HOA used the restitution money to complete several long-delayed maintenance projects and build up a healthy reserve fund. As for me, I got exactly what I had wanted when I moved to Meadowbrook Springs. A peaceful community, a well-maintained property, and neighbors who looked out for each other. It just took a fight to get there. The heated walkway still runs perfectly. On cold winter mornings, I stand at my window with coffee and watch it do its job, keeping things clear and safe. It is a daily reminder that sometimes you have to destroy the old guard's ice-covered tyranny to make way for something better. And every time Karen Fletcher slips a little on her icy walkway while glaring at my heated, snow-free concrete, I smile. Not because I enjoy her discomfort, but because she represents everything that was wrong with the old HOA. The entitlement, the refusal to innovate, the desire to tear down rather than build up. The spring after Patricia's sentencing, the community voted to rename the street where I lived. It had been Wintergreen Drive. The vote was to change it to Homestead Way, representing the idea that this was a place where people owned their homes and their choices, not a place where arbitrary authority dictated every detail. My address became 847 Homestead Way. It felt appropriate. 3 years have passed now since that December morning when I discovered my system destroyed. The legal bills are paid. The property is restored. The heated walkway has operated flawlessly through 3 winters, requiring only routine maintenance. But more importantly, Meadowbrook Springs has become what it always should have been. A real community where people help each other, where reasonable rules are reasonably enforced, and where innovation and improvement are celebrated rather than punished. I expanded my heated system one more time, adding coverage to my entire driveway and the approaches to my garage. The installation was approved by the board in about 15 minutes with no drama. Mike's crew did the work in 3 days. George finished his term as HOA president and chose not to run again, feeling he had accomplished what he set out to do. Linda Walsh took over as president, bringing fresh energy and ideas. The HOA continues to function smoothly, transparently, and fairly. Last month, a reporter from a Denver newspaper contacted me. She was writing a feature story about HOA reform in Colorado and had heard about what happened in Meadowbrook Springs. We talked for over an hour. What would you say to other homeowners dealing with corrupt or abusive HOAs? She asked. I thought about it carefully. Document everything. Know your rights and your community's governing documents better than the board does. Find allies because you cannot fight alone. And understand that standing up to bullies is expensive and exhausting, but sometimes it is necessary. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. The article ran last week. It featured a photo of my heated walkway with snow falling around it, the concrete dry and clear while ice covered the street beyond. The headline read, "How one Colorado homeowner's fight against HOA corruption changed his community." I framed a copy and hung it in my garage, right next to the control panel for the heated system, not as a trophy but as a reminder. A reminder that systems are only as good as the people operating them. That power without accountability will always be abused, and that sometimes the best way to fight back against those who tear things down is to build something better. The heated walkway hums in the background of my life now, a constant presence that I barely notice until winter comes and I remember why I fought so hard for it. It keeps my property safe. It serves the community. And it represents a principle that extends far beyond melted snow and clear concrete. The principle that you should not have to ask permission to make your life better, as long as you are not harming others. That rules should serve people, not control them. And that standing up to tyrants, even petty neighborhood tyrants, is always worth the cost. My heated walkway is not just a heating system. It is a statement. And every winter, when the snow falls and my walkway stays clear while Patricia's old allies struggle with ice and frustration, that statement gets made again. I fought for my right to improve my property. I won. And the community is better for it. That is the story of how the HOA seized my heated walkway system, and how I rerouted it to serve the community instead of submitting to their corruption. It is a story about standing up, fighting back, and building something better from the wreckage of petty tyranny. And every time I walk out my door in winter and feel that warm, dry concrete beneath my feet, I remember that the fight was worth it.